Very welcome, everybody. Welcome to our latest Host in Ireland webinar. Is Ireland destined to become a Tier 2 hosting location? The format for today's webinar will be a chat with our panelists here, followed by a question and answer session. Of course, as always, you can input your questions at any time. You don't have to wait till the Q&A session starts by using the Q&A button there on the bottom of your screen. If you're joining us today from LinkedIn Live, we have one of our team, Stephen, standing by to take any questions that you might post there, and he'll pop them into the room here for our panelists. For those of you who are no stranger to Host in Ireland webinars, you know we are never short of questions. So what we want to do is we want to try and get through as many as possible. So we would suggest if there is a question similar to yours already posted, that you simply upweight that so it rises to the top. We will try to get through as many questions as we possibly can today. So without further ado, I will hand over to our moderator for this morning or this afternoon's webinar, Garry Connolly. Over to you, Garry.
Thank you, Tanya, and welcome everybody. Indeed, today for the next 60 minutes or 58 minutes, we're going to answer or try to answer this question. Is Ireland destined to become a Tier 2 data hosting location? And genuinely, we've put together 4 grown-ups to help us answer that question. Maurice Mortell, Seamus Dunne, Peter Lantry, and Dave McCauley. It's always important when we have these discussions that we don't get too deep and too narrow too early. We need to have context for why that matters if Ireland becomes a Tier 2 data hosting location. So to help us understand that, I just thought we'd run through a little bit of history, a bit of geography, and we effectively look at 50 years ago this year, Ireland entered the EU. Well, what did that mean? We went in, and as many of us that are a bit older have seen the advantages of, we got access to capital, we built roads, we built infrastructure. But actually, this photograph that you're seeing on your screen is Main Street, North City, Dublin in 1973, where we were actually, our largest export was what's called cattle on the hoof, cows, going down to the cow boat or the cattle boat down in Dublin Port. The second export, and it's important, and we'll touch on it later, was people, talent. So what's happened since 1973? Well, what's happened since 1973 is that we've seen 5 effective waves of ICT or computers or technology, ranging from mainframes to mini computers to personal computers to the cloud. So many of you may remember your first introduction to this world as a floppy disk or a CD-ROM. Well, actually now that's all on the cloud. What's the cloud? It's a data center. So all the advantages that we've seen in the past, what did those 5 waves mean to Ireland? Well, those 5 waves were reflected in all of these wonderful companies that have come into Ireland over the last 50 years, from IBM, Nixdorf, right the way through to some of the people who are on this panel, where they're bringing their cloud services, and from Ireland, we export all that data. Is it a big industry in Ireland? You betcha it's a big industry in Ireland. ICT and related services is by far our largest export. It accounts for over 28% of Ireland's export. It's a woven fabric, of course. And this is the worst dad joke you're going to hear, or maybe the first dad joke. Ireland's economy has moved from a spud economy to chips. I'll just let that settle in for a second. Sorry, Carla, let's go to the next one. We didn't get the response. What is it? It's our largest export. So when we just throw up a heading such as, is Ireland now destined to be a Tier 2 data hosting location? What we'd like you to consider at the start is the word data, because that has been part of our DNA, our economic growth, our economic transformation for the last 50 years. So it's an interesting one to then pose to Maurice Mortell the question, When you look at that, Maurice, you observe sort of what I've just presented over the last 50 years. I won't suggest you lived through it all because you were only a little boy, but it must fill you with great pride in one respect. And then not so much pride when you sort of bring us forward to where we sit today and the purpose of this discussion. So what does it make you feel like when you see that transformation?
Well, I was very young in 1973, but yeah, I mean, a very good place to start, I think, is really just to understand or not forget, how we got here, and understand the bold steps that were taken in the mid to late 90s to effectively, start what we have now as the data center industry in Ireland. At that stage, there wasn't any data center infrastructure or digital infrastructure in the country bar the telcos and most enterprises doing their own stuff in their own buildings. But yeah, a bold step by the Department of Communications, supported by the IDA to entice global crossing to bring in transatlantic fiber into Ireland to connect North America with the island here, buy all that capacity effectively, cheaply in order to on the back of deregulating the telecoms market to entice new entrants into the market at low rates. So effectively, we funded the start of the industry as a state in order to attract in providers. And I mean, that's effectively how the industry started, and that's how the industry started in all the other countries. If you think about it, Amsterdam, Frankfurt, London, Paris, all had done something similar with regards to attracting in connections, I think, fiber connections from around the world into those locations. And being mainland Europe for three of those locations, for an island to get that capacity in was a major feather in our cap. That on the back of that attracted in a number of the embryonic data center providers. So the likes of Interaction came into Ireland, and a company called City Reach and Worldport and Telecity back in those days. And they built facilities, a huge risk, massive capital investment, without really knowing how it's going to evolve, where was it going to evolve. So, my trips back in the 90s over to Amsterdam to visit City Reach and London to see Telehouse and Frankfurt to see Interaction was, how were they building up this capability and understanding what it was that was driving demand. So initially, network dense locations where telcos and internet service providers and content distribution companies could distribute content and exchange traffic between each other, internet exchanges, that sort of, if you think of the names of these businesses, Interaction, that's the reason why it's called Interaction. City Reach is the reason why it's called City Reach, because you were enabled to reach other places on the back of networks. And Telehouse is where all these connections came in. So that was the embryo of it, and that's what started. And that's how Ireland sort of got its footprint. And that went through a lot of challenges, by the way, in the early 2000s. Peter inherited a site that Old Data Electronics bought in 1997, which is DB3 now, and that was a green field. It was a field in Northwest Business Park. It hadn't even been developed. And they were big, bold steps to take by lots of companies, and a lot of investment came in. But as it turned out, a lot of businesses went out of business because there wasn't enough customers to bring in, and there wasn't enough revenue being generated, and the industry consolidated, and 4 or 5 vibrant providers came out of that market into the 2000s. But I suppose the next big change step was cloud computing, and Ireland already had a significant footprint of tech companies in Ireland, and they're all household names. Microsoft, Amazon, Google were already here with the European operations, so it made absolute sense for them to develop their availability zones out of Ireland and other locations. But Ireland became sort of a big hub for those businesses, built on the back of what had already happened.
And isn't that the key thing? The evolution of the industries that were established here.
Yeah.
And for the less technical people maybe that are listening, and maybe don't see the centers that hold the data as just big, large boxes. Effectively, they're an evolution of the floppy disks and the CD-ROMs that we used to export, right, in 40-foot containers by the hundreds of thousands. Is that fact? That is the case, that's just the evolution. The cloud is now just the evolution of those floppy disks that we used to all 45 of them to put our Microsoft Word on a PC?
Well, in very simple terms, yes. You know, if you just get to where we are now, I mean, to think of how the industry has built up over the last 20 years, what the footprint that we have, you know, how we, you know, go to attract businesses into this country for foreign direct investment, how we stand in the European context as a digital hub. You know, we're right up there. So we've been hugely successful in this industry. You know, there's always a view that, well, do we have more than we need? And the answer is that we are a country, and we're also part of Europe. And you know, we're a destination for a lot of the inward investment that comes into Europe as a digital hub. And you know, that's only going one way, which is it's evolving and it's growing. Europe Fit for the Digital Age, the European Green Deal, all that stuff is built around digital infrastructure. The more infrastructure you put out there, the more greener they can make the continent. That's part of the 2050 strategy for Europe. So you know, we are in that game. I think the challenge we have at the moment is you know, we've kind of fallen foul of our own success to a certain extent, and it's something that I never thought would happen. By the way, I always thought we'd be looking at a much kind of a more adult conversation around digital services and how we sort of evolve those, then going back to just, you know, energy and not being able to support the growth of the industry. And something, by the way, that I used to go over to America and sit down and talk to these companies, and we talked about how vibrant and how, you know, our grid was seen as one of the best, an exemplar worldwide for its capability and its, you know, availability and its engineering expertise. And now we've got ourselves into an awful logjam around being able to support the growth and also facilitate other demands that the country has that they're trying to meet.
So what's a really interesting part, and Seamus and Peter will cover it a few moments, is that even with that global crossing cable, it was the capacity that was used day one was tiny compared to the super highway, as it was called at the time, that was being created to be filled by the next wave of technology. And that there's many parallels to what Peter and Seamus will talk about. Is whatever we might think we need now, we're only putting the paving stones down for the next wave. So thanks for that, Maurice. You're now a historian. We'll get you a gig on RTE on reeling in the years now next time round, right? I'll bring in the scientist of the gang, Dave McCauley. How are you?
How are you, Gary? How are you guys?
Good. So you've been tracking this industry initially from an inside perspective, and now you now look at it from the outside, meaning you were part of a semi-state body. You now look at it from a commercial perspective. Give us some of your observations and comments with regard to the industry, how it's grown, as in the digital infrastructure data center space, please.
Yeah, of course. So I started looking at the industry in about 2016, 17. As a complete outsider, like coming from sustainability and energy perspective, didn't know anything about digital technology really to speak of. Started looking at the industry, started asking a lot of questions, and it's very hard to get answers because it is quite a kind of contained industry. People don't really talk about, they don't want to show off their facilities too much. And we started mapping and trying to figure out how many data centers are there, how big are they, and how much energy they might need. Because up to then, growth in electricity was, we had large pharmaceutical plants, but really we were projecting forward to have growth in demand from electric vehicles and heat pumps. And I think the state didn't really necessarily project growth in electricity demand from digital infrastructure. And I think at the time in 2017, we did a report with Host in Ireland, and we came out with, I think it was like 400 megawatts, something like that, across about 45 facilities. And I think, 15 of those were really, really small, kind of cabinet almost. Another 15 were the kind of the colo guys. And we'd started at that point to see Microsoft, Google, and Amazon and Facebook as well, starting to build bigger facilities. We've kind of tracked that every quarter since then, and we've seen a continued fairly steady growth, fairly predictable growth. I think the numbers we produced in 2017, I think projecting forward, we project more in the future, but I don't think there was any surprise in the level of growth of the industry, the level of construction that we've seen. We're building on average about 10 facilities at a given time, and they probably take 2 years to build. So we're seeing that trajectory continue. Going forward, there's a huge demand for kind of third party data center developments to help with housing of hyperscales. So my point, I suppose, would be that the growth is being projected, and it tallies in. We've always checked back to EirGrid's numbers to see what they're projecting forward, and there's no surprises in there for the past few years. I think then we obviously have the Garry. You're going to jump in.
Is that the surprise that it's a surprise then, Dave?
I think so. Yeah, I mean,
if you knew in 2007, then why is it always a surprise when the growth? We might even be able to go pre that.
I don't think we've long enough here today to talk about why there's a challenge in the energy system, but it has been well documented. If we look at the McCarthy report that came out along the energy security stuff a couple of weeks ago, it's well documented, the kind of risks of system brownouts and stuff like that. It's all being covered, so we don't need to talk about that too far. I think the important thing, though, for us to look at as an industry is we have these kind of climate change, climate action plan targets moving forward in terms of reduction of energy demand, but also deployment of a lot of renewables. And I think if we project forward, I mean, the growth in electricity supply is going to well outstrip the growth in demand from data centers, because we're going to have, like, I think it's 9 gigawatts of onshore wind, 8 gigawatts of solar. I know it's Ireland, and today it wouldn't seem to work too well, but it still produces a lot at that kind of level. And then 6, 7, 8 gigawatts of offshore wind. And I think if you compare the two trajectories, the supply side and the renewable side is definitely going to move. It needs to move faster. Whether it can or not is a different question. But the demand is there for the data center industry to buy that power and to build the infrastructure and to make it all work together. And I think what we've seen is, based on the system challenges that we've had in the past 2 years in particular, we've seen a bit of a kind of brakes on situation where the regulator is kind of going, let's apply a set of rules now to this particular class of energy user. And I don't necessarily think that's the right approach. I think we need to work together and not, and the guys will talk to, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater sort of thing. I think that's the situation we're in. We have a huge opportunity, but we have a challenge.
A little bit like what Maurice covered earlier, the reason that we traversed across from CD-ROMs to having this challenge of success was that we collaborated, public-private partnership, Global Crossing, IDA, Department of Communications, worked well together. I think Maurice said that very well. That was the big statement of intent, wasn't it? That transatlantic fibre cable with off-island. So before we move on to Peter, is that what you see as missing today, just as a comment and an observation? The collaboration side between the demand, the supply, and everything in between?
I think there's definitely been a sense of, if we could just get rid of these data centers, we wouldn't have all this demand problem, and that would fix everything and we'd meet our climate targets. But clearly that is not the way forward for Ireland. It's, as you said, it's a third of our exports. I mean, it is who we are, and we're good at it, and we just need to figure out how to do it better and work with the system. And I certainly, from my experience working with data center developers, the question I always get is, what do we need to do to move forward? It's never a negative conversation. I've had all these positive kind of feedback from the industry saying, what do we need to do? We'll throw money at it. Obviously, it's not an unlimited supply of funds, but if things make sense and seem fair and a level playing field, then we'll do it.
Okay.
But I think we've really had the brakes on situation where the door was kind of, in terms of consultation, it has felt a little bit one way in the past while. We've had a few consultations. And we're obviously waiting to see what the return is on that. But
Okay.
it might not be a positive outcome for us.
So Peter Lantry, current country manager of Equinix, you're an interesting poacher come gamekeeper. You could nearly be, and I guess you're going back in and you're chatting to your ex-colleagues in Airgrid, etc. So you have a really interesting perspective on this. And if I've read anything this week that's been attached to your name is, we are about to score any number of own goals has been picked up by a lot of people. Own goals. I guess that means that they're preventable in one respect, but the others are going to score. Can you just articulate on that a little bit, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, Gary, we have a situation right now where we're being stopped from developing more data center footprints. And we're being told it's because there's a risk to the carbon budget for Ireland. And the question isn't being asked, will you help us to achieve a better outcome from a carbon budget point of view? Will you work with us to plan a solution? How can we do this together? And the own goal is that pause, that moratorium essentially on data centers has been going on now for a couple of years. And I'm already beginning to see the fact that, the data centers that we have, which are retail data centers that are there for customers in Ireland who want to become more sustainable. They want to take all their inefficient digital equipment that's running off local power supplies in their companies, their offices. They want to move it into highly efficient, purpose-built facilities, which also gives them lots of services and products and connects them around the world to other customers, other companies. We're being stopped from doing that. Those same customers, they're still going to have to develop their digital solutions. They're just going to do it in a really inefficient way, or they're going to do it in another country. And, that's the embarrassing thing for us at the moment, is that all of the data center companies are working together. We're all signed up to the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact. We're all looking at sustainability solutions and we're doing it faster, in fact, than the governments are doing, than the regulators do, and we're ahead of this game. But what we're not being let do is provide flexible solutions to support the grid in the way in which we'd like to. And that's a shame. That's a real own goal moment for us, because not only can we support the digital economy and really grow it, we can also support the actual problems in the grid where there's constraints. And I'm looking at the Airgrid website, and in fairness, Airgrid, who I used to work for 17 years, they publish a lot of really good information. They're very transparent. And one of the things they do publish every month is how much renewable power isn't used and wasted because of curtailments or constraints. In other words, the grid can't use it, or there's not enough demand to use it on the grid. And we're losing around 12% or more than 12% across the island at the moment. In the last quarter, it was 12% wasted of renewable power, which is, again, a crying shame. And if I think, David, you're correct in those numbers. At the moment, we use 5.5 gigawatts of power in the island of Ireland at peak time. If we put in all this renewable power, which would be fantastic, and we all support that, it'll be 4 times as much power again on the grid. At 4 times as much power on the grid on a sunny, windy day, that's going to be wasted because there's no one to use it. And we're not going to develop a hydrogen economy fast enough. We're going to work with that. And absolutely, the data center industry will be there to support that. But we won't be able to develop it fast enough to use it unless we come up with ways of being flexible and come up with a roadmap. So we could work with the regulator, work with the grid operators, and work with the government to agree a roadmap, a way in which we can do this using gas as a backup, which, by the way, is better than burning coal, which the grid operator will have to do when they're under pressure. Imagine they could turn around to all the data centers and say, just use your gas backups there that we've let you put in. Right now, the letter to the Gas Networks Ireland leadership is you're not allowed to give any data centers gas backup solutions, which is crazy. It's nuts.
So there's a couple of messages you're sending out there, is that it's not just a challenge for the data center industry. It's a national challenge to decarbonize the grid, which just happens to, so a term like data center demand hasn't broken the grid. It's just possibly exposed it for its inefficiencies and needing to move forward. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's somewhat fair. I mean, I think what's missing is a design solution that allows us to be flexible, a way in which we can work together with the grid. I think the grid operators at the moment and the regulators and everyone involved kind of models us as an amount of power that's needed and never won't need it. In other words, they have to model and design everything to be able to give that amount of power all the time. And they don't consider the idea in the design right now of it being flexible. So if they were to do that in a really proactive way, what we'd find actually is that you could put 2 gigawatts of data center capacity into the Dublin Metro. And if it's flexible, using gas as a backup and then transferring over to another renewable gas or renewable source of power in the future, like hydrogen, that actually would be really, really helpful to supporting stability in the grid. And they could work in harmony together. And that allows us to do what we're supposed to be doing, which is selling digital solutions, digital projects, interconnectivity, global data exports. And to be honest, if we can't use that power, we're going to end up finding ways to export that power to other countries for them to use it. That's actually quite wasteful. If we could use it locally and actually convert that power as a source of, it's an input into a product. If we could use that to come up with really, really high value add digital solutions, innovations, ways in which we can support all of the industries, fintech, the medical, agriculture sector, all of these sectors, manufacturing, all of these digital solutions, EV cars, automated cars, great potential for us. But we need to be able to continue to develop and grow.
So thank you so much. Seamus, you've been so respectful and quiet there. Thank you, firstly. It's not easy coming forth of a panel of people who own their own stories. So one of the things that is great to have you on this panel to discuss is your role as Digital Realty, not just for Ireland, but for the UK as well. So you work in and from Ireland. So you can talk about what we're doing here or not doing here, more to the point, is being perceived internationally, because you're actually in a way competing with us. So can you talk to that story of how easy we're making it for other places to eat our cake, I guess?
It's hard to add too much more to what Maurice said, for starters, in terms of the history, what got Ireland here. It's an incredibly good story. And I had lived in the United States and came back to Ireland, and 4 years ago started in this company, in this industry, because of the investments that Maurice described, that you could work in a small country like Ireland, but still be a significant player and a global presence. The successful foreign direct investment strategy this has paid off. And what Dave then talked about in terms of supply and demand, and going from, as Maurice said, being perceived as a great location that maybe we haven't really been able to keep up. And they've talked about matching supply and demand. What I would say, maybe not to repeat what the rest of the group have just said, is it's disappointing we haven't kept up with the grid investments and bringing on renewables fast enough. But we work in an IT infrastructure business, and I think, unfortunately, it's a serious issue. We're going to get left behind with a digital economy. No other country faced with similar challenges and constraints has put the brakes on and shut down and paused like this. I work with Singapore, who have similar challenges, and they looked at how you allocate and bridge over until they can bring on generating capacity. Amsterdam is successful like us with their digital economy, and had challenges, and they decided on policy decisions to restrict size and so on, so they could allocate, but don't stop the industry. So what we're doing in Ireland is unique, and unfortunately quite damaging. When I look at the UK, where I'm spending most of my time, that's where I am at the moment. I'm building up my air miles between City Airport and Dublin, but I'm spending more time here just because the digital economy in the UK is growing. The government have just announced a £500 million investment over 2 years in artificial intelligence technologies and quantum computing. And, you know, it's very successful. And two things happened in the last couple of years that have emphasized how important a digital economy is, if we didn't know it already, especially to a place like Ireland. The first one was COVID. So, you know, we got to do to affect the workers in our facilities were called critical infrastructure employees because, you know, the health service had to keep running. Zoom calls were going, online shopping and e-commerce was, and the network that makes that all work got tested, proved to be resilient. So, you know, that was proof, if it was needed, that digital economies drive economic growth. The second thing that's happened in the last couple of years is artificial intelligence. Whatever you think about it, there's a lot of good applications for artificial intelligence. It is big, and it will be as significant as cloud computing that you talked about at the start of your talk. For example, in the United States, our company, Digital Realty, has done the biggest deal in its history based on artificial intelligence and graphic processor units as a service. And it's big and significant. And not the investment in the UK from the government is not just for digital economies. It's really built around life sciences, new drugs, telemedicine, climate analysis, forecasting, big data, and how you use intelligence to deal with that, and quantum computing to bring it up. So it's almost like IT infrastructure has to happen. So that advancement and the next phase of a digital economy, I doubt it's just not happening in Ireland, and it's tough for me as an Irish person to and responsible for Ireland to see us miss out on that. I think. Go ahead.
Sorry, I've often heard you talk about an interesting thing, which is in foreign direct investment in, say, some of the other sectors like life sciences, pharmaceuticals, fintech. The investor often leads first with the data, resting in a geography, and then follows it with all the other secondary and tertiary jobs. So my sense is that if that's the follow through and you don't have any capacity to bring them as a beachhead, there's a problem because they're going to go somewhere else, right?
Let me give 2 examples. So both Peter and I, we run businesses where we build data centers for clients to use our facilities and put their IT infrastructure in there. I can think of an example of 2 very large US companies in Ireland who employ thousands of people. In fact, one of them recently announced the addition of 500 new jobs in software development and other back office activities. They run a software as a service. So they sell software, which companies buy, and they need to run that software on IT infrastructure, which they place in facilities. That's the business we have. They put it in facilities like Peter and I manage. And the general trend for those sort of companies is to run large deployments in Amsterdam and Dublin. And they build up their European business with that IT infrastructure. And of course they do, because that's their software developers, their back office, their sales folks, was all in proximity to their IT infrastructure. And the term, I hear a lot of people talk about, like, those 2 things are separate. Data centers don't create employment. The employment is the IT services that are sold out of Ireland, and they're built on IT infrastructure. You cannot separate them. And right now, I'm saying to both those customers, I'm sorry, we can't expand with you anymore. And they're looking at 5- and 10-year plans to expand in Ireland. And, we sat with their executives in Dublin, and, they turned to their own team and they said, like, well, do we have to be in Ireland? And, the answer was, no, not really. Actually, there's alternatives. So I'm personally working on those alternatives that aren't Ireland, not just in the UK, but elsewhere in Europe. So the thing is, it won't create a jobs crisis immediately, but it will start one. And, you know, I don't know how that will unfold, but you cannot separate where you get to build your IT infrastructure and technology from where you want to put your employment clusters to run your business. And so it is as serious as that. Unfortunately, you know, I hate to be a doom monger, but it's a very serious situation. And it won't all fall apart tomorrow. But the problem is reversing trends is a very difficult thing. So
agreed fully. And there's so many points that we could pick up on what you've said. The jobs thing is always interesting, and enabler. Data is the enabler. It's a bit like saying that electricity doesn't create any jobs. It retains all jobs. And I'm sure 50, 60 years ago, if you were looking at a substation and a generator, and you say that electricity isn't going to create any jobs, but then we realize that it's sustaining all jobs. So that discussion, I hope over time, will become like the electricity generating distribution side in terms of data. And one final quick question to you before we move on is, it's not that there aren't other challenges in other geographies, Seamus, because anywhere the world is going through two major megatrends, digitalization and decarbonization. And it's not just Ireland. I think the point I like you're saying, and maybe you could just give us a quick on, it's how we're addressing it is unique, and there are better exemplars.
I think Peter did a great job talking about, you know, if there was collaboration, we have solutions to overcome these problems. I mean, the approach we've taken in Ireland is to shut down and demonize and put the brakes on. It's really damaging, and I don't think people understand the reputational damage to us as an economy, particularly as a tech economy, and how that influences decisions. And that damage is happening, unfortunately, right now, and it doesn't need to. This sort of challenges exists in a lot of countries, particularly successful ones. In London, where I am, West London has a challenge with power. But as I talk to the local councils about where we'll develop next, it's very collaborative. I know there's a certain schadenfreude in the rest of the EU, including Ireland, about the UK, but I'm sorry, I'm here, and it's very dynamic, at least in the southeast. And there's collaboration both with governments, universities, and the local authorities and the power suppliers, even though there are constraints in pockets like in West London. So we're looking at what you can do in the corridor towards Oxford and Cambridge and other places. So there's ways of collaborating. Singapore, you know, they're a similar economy to Ireland in terms of the size of their economy and how they, you know, work as a hub in their region. And they have constraints because of their success, and they have allocation systems so that they don't stop progress. And they'll find ways of collaborating to find solutions, but also in the short term, find ways to not stop the digital economy working. I could think of more. Amsterdam, you know, that's a similar challenge. I talked to my counterparts in Copenhagen and Vienna. They're working to attract and grow in those segments, which they're doing successfully, and there are alternatives, unfortunately.
Garry, can I? So yeah,
Maurice, go on.
I was just going to sort of row in at the back of what James has said. I mean, it's hugely frustrating. We're sleepwalking into a catastrophe at the moment, and everyone is standing up and raising their hand and saying, "What are we doing? You know, how have we got to this point in time?" And there's been little, if no, engagement with the industry. I mean, it's appalling set of circumstances. The last consultation paper by the CRU, you know, there was 50 or 60 suggested recommendations on the back of that the industry put forward. Some of them Peter went through earlier on about how we could assist. You know, if it was going to be everyone, if it was constrained, okay, fine. What can we do? Where? How? You know, how long is it going to take? How can we help you? How can we support the investment? You know, a lot of companies with deep pockets that, you know, are able to look at long-term positions in countries, and instead we took out a hatchet and, you know, knocked off one of the legs and said, well, no, that's it. And the inertia we see at the moment is, isn't even policy. This is just, planning, grid connections, GNI, EPA, no one doing anything to say, no, sorry, we can't talk to you guys. That's it. And, on you go. And as Seamus said, it took 25 years to get to this point, and we've been hugely successful, and we can continue to be successful if we get the right people around the table to have the right conversation about, okay, how do we continue? We know the challenges, we know the concerns, we know the at the moment, those competing priorities, climate action goals and sustainable development and digitization, they seem to conflict each other, but in reality, they don't. They complement each other, and you just need to get over that and look further than, oh, we've got a problem for demand at the moment, and sort of this negative narrative that's been spun around the industry, which is just, not true.
Peter, go back 4 years and answer that question.
Like if I'm sitting in with an air grid hat on, I'm also frustrated, right? Because I'm thinking, I know that if I'm able to get the right type of rules in place here, I can work with this industry to get the outcome I want, to be able to get a flexible grid. Like what Maurice said there, these are complementary. The issue is the narrative outside at the moment isn't helpful. The idea that data centers aren't good from an environmental point of view is really misinformed. And that's the risk. People aren't recognizing the fact that digital solutions like the ones that Seamus and ourselves and Equinix do, that's a solution that is much more sustainable than the alternative. And it's amazing that people aren't waking up to that and really singing from the rooftops that we should have more of this capability available so that we can achieve our sustainability goals. And not only that, we're willing to do it in a flexible way. So we'll help with digital sustainability. We'll also help with additional renewable power being added to the Irish grid, specifically to the Irish grid. And on top of that, we'll do it flexibly. So we'll install things like gas solutions where we can, back off our requirements from the grid. That sort of stuff is gold dust when you're a utility operator who's trying to make these things happen. So we will actually speed up and ramp up the pace at which we get to a renewable solution. And my worst fear is we actually deliver all of this renewable power in it, and it's variable renewable power, and we end up wasting the majority of it because we haven't had an agreed process.
I'd like to ask you and use this opportunity to ask you a question that's come in from Barry McMullen, who's rightly observing of the panel that we're all we run the risk of some group think here.
Of course.
So can we maybe in the point that you're making there, there's two challenges that we have to align and make sure is met in Ireland, which is decarbonisation of our society in line with our climate action plan, whilst maintaining our, I'll use the term golden goose, which is effectively data, foreign direct investment, etc. Can you sort of allay some of the fears that, yeah, great, we've got a really strong economy, but the planet is unlivable? What's your view on that, and specifically around the desire to couple the two together?
Yeah, I think, and I'm speaking on behalf of Equinix, but actually all the companies that are involved in the digital infrastructure installations in this country have the same goals to be climate neutral by 2030. So, and that's just not just covering things by guarantees of origin. That's actually doing things differently. We reduce our use of power by 5% at least every year in Equinix. So that's the reduction on a data. If you keep the data level, we reduce our operational use of power by 5% using different solutions. And on top of that, we're going to be doing CPP, so CPPA, so it's a power purchase agreement. We're going to be doing that in Ireland, and we're going to have enough power being bought by a corporate power purchase agreement to cover all of our historical and future development requirements. So it's a really quite a significant investment that Equinix is willing to make, and other companies are willing to do the same thing, to actually bring in renewable power that wouldn't otherwise get the funding that is needed to be built. So you won't even achieve the targets for renewable integration without us.
So to answer John's suggestion that, okay, we can create more demand, what you're saying is, and I've heard it many times from cross industry in the digital infrastructure space, is that we're not even at the table to discuss supply demand in the same discussion as climate action plan, because it's only a one-sided discussion. Right now, what the industry is looking for is open platform for collaboration to demonstrate that we can grow, it can succeed, and also be in compliant with the climate action plan.
Absolutely. We all want the same thing. Yeah.
All want the same thing. Okay. Question here, very quick one for Dave as the scientist. And I'm define a tier 1 and tier 2 location, Dave.
So I think Seamus is better placed to do this one.
Beautiful pass there.
If I make an attempt,
yeah.
Sorry, Seamus, go for it.
Since Dave punted it this way, so tier 1 for sure historically in Europe has been Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Paris, and Dublin. And that's largely for a few different reasons. First of all, they started as the connectivity hubs that Maurice described, and how Ireland got in the act, being a relatively small financial services hub and a bursary compared to those other locations. That's the historical context. But for the connectivity hubs that attract the existence of data centers, that's one huge factor that you need. The second is that you form a critical mass to attract the availability zones and the expansions of those availability zones for larger scale cloud computing systems. And you also have a cluster of competence. So for example, in Ireland, you cannot, I emphasize, cannot go to a data center manufacturing site without hearing Irish accents, Irish contractors, the general contractor, the electrical contractor, the quantity surveyors, and the list goes on. So you've got a critical set of resources, you've built up a set of supply chains, competencies, abilities. That's tier 1. Tier 2 is some very big locations around Europe. So certainly places like Vienna are growing. I've talked to my counterpart there a lot, and they're working to attract people in and grow, but they're not nearly at the scale that those tier 1 locations are at. Copenhagen and Stockholm are trying to do something similar, and other locations around. So that it will expand out. The digital infrastructure will expand, but that critical hub of attraction, both for the data itself in terms of data gravity, but also the resources and the supply chain around. So
that's a great point you bring up, and we've even seen in our membership over the last 3 to 5 years that maybe 90% of our partners in Ireland and from Ireland are really interested in exporting out skills and services. So when we talk about jobs, it's the ecosystem. We've got to look at that in and from. So there's a few more questions coming in. I'll put this one to the group. Hopefully it's a quick one. Is surely the solution is nuclear?
No, in Ireland, I think the problem with nuclear is going to be that it's very much a non-runner from a political point of view. It's also, we're quite a small power use country at the moment. So there are new innovations around small nuclear reactors that are being developed, and they may well be used in other countries. They won't be used in Ireland first, and it takes many years to produce them. Certainly nuclear should be a conversation that's had. I'm part of the Energy, Environment and Climate Action group in Engineers Ireland, as is Barry McMullen, interestingly. And we often talk about the different opportunities within Ireland to deal with the climate action plan, and nuclear comes up. And nuclear certainly is an interesting debate, but I don't think Ireland's ready for nuclear just yet. I do think, though, that we should be able to do the right thing from an Irish point of view, from a climate action plan point of view, by introducing much more flexibility into how we use the grid, and also making sure that we are doing everything within our power to support the development of the grid. Because the grid itself, the electricity grid now I'm talking about, is what will bring far more renewables onto the island and used within the island. But the other piece of the puzzle that's not been talked about much today is hydrogen. There's a hydrogen economy that's going to be developed. I'm a big believer in it, and I think that the data center segment is perfectly suited in Ireland to support innovations and thinking around hydrogen. So that's the kind of projects that Equinix is interested in getting involved in. I think the entire industry would be open to it. Those are the sorts of things that are going to lead to sustainability within the Irish context, I believe.
So Erling, thank you so much for your question. We're already importing nuclear electrons through our interconnects, but we have constitutional objections and stuff. We can blame the guy, the folk singer, for that, can't we? Christy Moore and the boys. But anyway,
Gary, let me just add something to Peter's point. So, and the question around nuclear. What Peter says is true, which is a political or a national challenge. There's no technical reason why nuclear couldn't work, by the way. What I experience is a lot of my counterparts, particularly in the United States, trying to help by suggesting things. So they've suggested many times, hey, why don't you use small nuclear? It's very successful. That's a solution to the problem in other locations in the United States and in some other countries. So I explained to them, no, that won't work. And why, as Peter just explained. Then we talk about fuel cells, and maybe that'll work. Hydrogen, yeah, maybe that'll. What it looks like from outside of Ireland is nothing seems to work for you guys, and you still have a problem. It's hard for them to compute. They're trying to say, there's solutions here. This has been overcome elsewhere. There's collaboration. So why is it so difficult? And so it's hard to explain. I mean, Peter's point on nuclear is absolutely correct. It's probably not a solution given history and so on. But I can tell you, for example, in Germany, when they switched from nuclear and they're moving, how they overcame their planning issues and really made some legislative changes so that they didn't hold their economy back is an example maybe we should look at. It's like they overcome some things. Is it really a technical problem? Is it our planning application process problem? Like, what holds us back? The north-south interconnector that I think Peter worked on, still not built. Now that's not a technical challenge, right? There's something else going on there.
I move over to Maurice for the next question, and it's linked to yours. And I'll say it if nobody else is, but NIMBYism has become an actual profession in this country, it seems, on lots of stuff. But it's certainly, Maurice, in your non-stock market share price hat on now, which is wonderful. Why can't we just shift this all out to Galway? What's the big deal about putting all these digital infrastructures in the greater Dublin? Why can't we just ship them all out there?
Well, we probably touched on it very early on when we talked about the history. I mean, the connectivity hubs that were built in Dublin in the late 90s, early 2000s are still the connectivity hubs today. Those landing stations that the cable was brought up from Wexford connect into 3 or 4 locations in Dublin. All the network density, all the on-ramps to the cloud service providers, all the content distribution, all the interconnection, all the ecosystems, they're all there. And the reason why it's a honeypot is, and all the businesses are around them, is because they're there. I mean, Seamus, what's the difference between tier 1 and tier 2? That's an example. Tier 1 is they're all there. It's 25 years in the building, and all the so I mean, the challenge has always been. I mean, I looked at that many times over the years. Cork, Galway, other locations, and maybe standalone for one customer might work on the basis that it's just meeting their own needs. But for enterprise data centers, you've got to have the latency sensitive, secure proximity to the eyeballs and the customers, and that's the way it is in every location around the world.
And I think the key thing, we've 5 minutes and a lot of questions to get through. The key thing there is that like what was said earlier, the industry has explored all this. If we could do it, we would, right? It's not like it's been done for any other reason than not all data is the same. not, different workloads are different workloads. Let's run through very quickly. I'm trying to look here.
Wouldn't mind talking to Dennis Duff's question. Actually, I think it's a good one. He's asking, are we committed to using only renewables backed up by gas? That's a brilliant question. I think at the moment, if you look at the practical solutions that we have available to us, what we have is renewable grid solutions, grid connections, and as much renewables as we can use there. Then we have gas as a backup, which will be used to support a stable grid. And yeah, that suggests we're just looking at renewables and gas. We're also looking then at how do you come up with biomethane solutions? So renewable gas. We're looking at hydrogen already, and ESB is actually leading the way on some really clever technology solutions there. So looking at hydrogen as an alternative or as another backup solution, and eventually hydrogen might become the primary source of power that we use in our data centers. So those things are options. And there's other things like diesel backup generators are in use right now. Maybe we use HVO, which is basically treated vegetable oil. And that could be used as well, and that's more sustainable. But the ideal thing for all of us is use electricity grid and have the electricity grid 100% renewable as much as possible, support that. And then the only way you're ever going to get that is by flexibility as well. So they're the things. And I think more interconnection is also a really good initiative if we can do it.
So the key thing there that to take away is in the world, I think, not just Ireland, because we can get very deep and very narrow here. We're going to be burning stuff for a very long time because, as you say, what's that German word you called this morning?
Dunkelflaute.
Dunkelflaute. If you've learned anything on this webinar today, that's the word to remember. One final question, because Dave, you've been so nice and so quiet and so respectful. Don't twitch when I say this, but surely private wire is the solution. That coming in, that's a question coming in. In 60 seconds, could you mention that? Why can't we connect the demand with the supply via private wires?
Well, it's quite topical, isn't it? Because we've had a consultation on private wire, which had many, many questions that had to be addressed. And I think the approach that the Department of Energy have been taken is to kind of come up with very compartmentalized solutions. And I think this is the same across the board of solutions that even the CRU are looking at. I think not all data centers are the same. I think it's not a one size fits all. I think our problem is around connecting supply and demand, variable supply generation with demand. Private wire maybe can help us in the short term to do things. As long, I think, as it can be connected back into the main grid in the future. But allowing things maybe to work in a kind of more virtual way. Like if you think of storage, we can build storage on site, but that takes a big footprint. Can we build storage somewhere else and find ways in the market, mechanisms in the market to make that work? I think that's a better long-term solution. And I think it allows other industries to participate as well. Whereas I think private wire for the hydrogen thing maybe works in the short term, but in for the bigger picture stuff, I think as well, I think trying to make private wire happen practically in the Irish energy system is going to be a challenge. It's going to take us 5 years before anybody's going to be allowed to build private wire, I would expect.
So what's most, and thank you to Seamus, thank you to Peter, Maurice, and yourself. Some takeaway thoughts if I was being introduced to this subject for the very first time is I'd be so frustrated when I listen to, it doesn't seem that technology is the challenge. It doesn't seem that financial ability is the challenge. It doesn't seem that demand is the challenge, or indeed supply of electricity is the challenge. So we have to then look very inward at ourselves and say, is it our policies? Is it our politicians? Is it our state? Because we just seem to be in this word that Maurice used very well, inertia. And it's only going to get solved by action, by somebody or somebody's being accountable as the digital czar or the digital infrastructure czar and stand up and bring all these bits together, because there's way more at play as we look to decarbonize our societies, decarbonize the planet, and also, and it has to be said, maintain Ireland's economic and job growth, right? So with that, I'll say thank you. We've been right on the button. Well done. Thank you so much. There's an awful lot of questions that we didn't answer. Thank you for all the people who've joined. And with that, we hope we'll be here in one more year when we're telling you all the stuff that has been done that today we've been discussing that just hasn't been done to date. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good afternoon.